Our next session is a statement talk. It's going to be given by Reem Tahouk, who is the Vice Chancellor Research Fellow at the School of Design and Centre for International Development at Northumbria University. She's going to deconstruct the terms resilience and innovation, in particular in regard to how we use them in contexts of refugee communities and the demands and expectations put on them.
August 4th, 2020 was the day of the Beirut port explosion that devastated the city and injured and killed hundreds. In the aftermath of the explosion, friends from the West got in touch to grieve with me, but also to say, Lebanese are resilient and will recover. When they would say that, I was screaming on the inside, no, Habibi, we do not want to be resilient. In 2010, the humanitarian system realized that things are simply not working, and humanitarian organizations turned towards innovation and the concept of resilience. Resilience is the ability of individuals, households, communities, and nations to anticipate, respond to, and recover from shocks and stressors like conflict. Some organizations, like the International Federation of Red Cross and Crescent, stressed that community resilience should maintain a focus on underlying vulnerabilities, and that recovery from shocks should not compromise long-term prospects of a community. That all sounds good, right? Who will ever say that communities should not be able to respond and recover from conflict, from displacement, from an explosion? No one. But what are the implications of the concept of community resilience on the ground? What narrative of humanitarianism is it propagating? And equally, where does innovation fit into this? Well, Duffield and Evans and Reed have all pointed out how implementing resilience and humanitarianism is problematic. In essence, when we are telling communities to be resilient, what we are doing is shifting the responsibility of responding to crises from states and humanitarian organizations to already vulnerabilized communities. We are also telling communities to shift their focus from structural inequalities to focus on anticipating shocks and stressors and preparing for them, rather than focusing on the day-to-day erosion of their capabilities and freedoms. By saying that communities should always be preparing for shocks and stressors, we are enforcing a dystopian way of being. A being that is always focused on something bad happening, rather than a narrative that is aspiration-based and focused on building communities that flourish. Here, you might say, Reem, isn't this just philosophical and theoretical speculation? Well, not really. When talking with Syrian refugees in Lebanon about how they characterize their resilience, they all said that resilience is survival. Resilience is accepting reality, a reality in which they have no choice. A reality where they know that if they as a community try to take action to be resilient in a way that they want to be resilient, they would be told, you can't do that. This is not your country. So how does technology and innovation fit into all of this? Well, let's take a few examples from my research. When Ashraf, an unaccompanied young asylum seeker in Austria, is struggling with mental health, he attempts to access an already underfunded and overwhelmed mental health service. While waiting for a month or more for his appointment, the service recommends a mental health app that is popular and well rated in the Google Play Store. Here we see a technology being part of a mechanism that is shifting the responsibility of addressing his mental health solely to him, rather than being a responsibility for him and a service provider. The technology is there to help him cope until the system can support him. But when Ashraf tries to use the app, he finds that the app is not designed for him. It is not designed for asylum seekers. And here we're not just talking about the language. We're talking about the environment and resources that the app designers assumed their users would have. For example, the app tells Ashraf that when he's having difficulty sleeping, he should work on separating the social and work spaces in his home from his sleeping space. How is Ashraf supposed to do that when he has been assigned to live in housing where he shares a room with 3 other asylum seekers that socialize in that room? So here we're not only seeing a shift in responsibility, but also the wider system asking an asylum seeker to be resilient while imposing migration policies that contribute to structural inequalities. Ashraf is being asked to change when the system is unwilling to change. Is this not dystopian? Now, Ashraf is an individual, but what about resilience at a community level? In a rural town in Lebanon, a group of Syrian refugee women living in an informal settlement meet every afternoon over coffee. They discuss their situation and exchange tips on how to secure food for their family. You see, the Lebanese government has imposed so many barriers for their husbands to secure a stable source of income. But they do receive food aid. And the World Food Program that provides that aid has fully embraced technologies and innovation. Before, refugees would have to go every month to receive a food aid box, but now they don't have to do that. A refugee initially meets with an aid worker that assesses their food security and vulnerability, and if eligible, signs them up for the electronic voucher system. They don't have to see the aid worker for months to get their aid. This is great. It is more dignified. But here, the technology is a technology of abandonment. The aid worker is now distanced from refugees. The amount of contact between refugees and aid workers is reduced. So how does the e-voucher system work? A refugee is given a debit card that the World Food Program tops up with money every month. The refugee can use this card to only buy food from a select number of shops that are usually owned by Lebanese. Again, here we see another form of shifting of responsibility. The shopkeeper is now the gatekeeper of the food aid rather than the humanitarian organization. In theory, the model is great. Refugees are given freedom of choice in food products, it is more dignified, and the Lebanese economy benefits, especially local shop owners. But in reality, it is much different. The shifting in responsibility mediated by the e-voucher system created space for refugees to experience racism and discrimination by Lebanese shop owners that would sometimes abuse the low technology literacy of refugees that have never used a debit card before. Shop owners would increase their prices because they know that refugees cannot go to another shop that's registered with the World Food Program to buy food. And they increased their prices for engaging in risky transactions that enabled refugees to buy non-food products using their food aid and the e-voucher system. My research points to the fact that by situating a technology in a specific space, while ignoring the racism Lebanese in that area have towards Syrians, while ignoring that Lebanese shop owners are also on the brink of poverty themselves, results in these experiences. By enabling these spaces, the technology is enforcing the status quo of discrimination against refugees. Now let's take this a step further and go back to our group of women that are meeting over coffee. They discuss how in an ideal world where they had cash available to them, they can form a collective that negotiates with shop owners on prices and buys in bulk so that they can all benefit from discounted prices. This is a form of resilience, is it not? Is it not a community that is taking action to respond to their crisis of food insecurity and displacement? Is it not a form of resilience that challenges the status quo by positioning them as a collective with agency to negotiate? But does the e-voucher enable it? The answer is no. The technology enforces the narrative of refugees being viewed as a household or individual, and not a community of action. by not enabling refugees to pool money available in their e-vouchers for collective purchasing. Shop owners are even advised when using this technology not to sell in bulk, because what if a refugee is benefiting from a bulk discount and is then portioning it up and selling it at a cheaper price than the shop owner? The technology is designed to secure that aid is used in the way promised to funders. And this happens at the expense of refugees practicing their collective agency. Therefore, the technology is a tool through which we are reinforcing a narrative that says that refugees cannot take collective action when engaging with other actors. And this is in line with the narrative that is part of the system of oppression practiced by the Lebanese state. When refugees wanted to elect a committee of representatives for each settlement that would liaise with the local Lebanese government, this was not allowed. And instead, local politicians selected a refugee from each settlement to be a liaison. So what we see from these examples is resilience being kept at the level of survival rather than that of flourishing. Resilience as coping with what is given, rather than resilience taking the form of collective action, community organization, and the practicing of agency in everyday interactions. And technologies are enforcing this dystopian narrative of resilience, a resilience that is not leading to transformational change. So the question I want to end on, that I hope we can all reflect on throughout today and the conference, is how can we design technologies for resilience that create a space for flourishing, a space for working towards challenging the status quo, and doing so, move away from the dystopian futures that are being enforced on refugees. Thank you.